So, first of all, welcome to container gardening. Are you excited? I am so excited. I actually have not gone to the nursery recently because I wanted to wait for Miss Nancy to come and give us some advice about how to make gardening in Florida successful. Don't we all want that? I used to live in Virginia, and I would go to the ground, I would put my seeds in, and boom, a few weeks later, I start having all this amazing food. When I moved to Florida, it died. And I'm like, what am I doing wrong? And so we're so excited to have her. And, we also wanted to develop this gardening culture. When you think about God's word, Genesis chapter 1, where did God place men and women? In a garden. And so part of our family ministries, we want to develop this gardening idea of what a better way to go outside to be with family, to plant seeds, to allow that seed to grow and to see fruits of your labor. So we're so excited today to have Miss Nancy with us. She will give you a short introduction of herself. And before that, Brittany is going to come on up. No? Okay. And I'm just going to have a short prayer, and we'll let her get right to it. So let's pray. Father in heaven, we just want to thank you for this opportunity to have Miss Nancy with us. Lord, she drove a long way this morning to come be with us, so we're so grateful for her expertise. We're so grateful for her experience. We're so grateful that we can be looking at gardening together as families, as friends, as church members. I just pray for a special blessing now as we learn tips of how to make gardening work in Florida. And so we thank you, we praise you, we honor you, we ask for your presence and angels to be among us. In Jesus' name, amen.
We ready? We ready? Okay, thank you. I want to thank you for inviting me here today. I haven't taught a class in 18 months. And it wasn't until I started thinking about, well, how do I structure this? What do I want to talk about? After Brittany asked me, that I realized how much I missed it. I teach through the Master Beekeepers program, the Master Gardener program, and the Master Beekeeper program. And I've been teaching these classes now for about 10 years. The talk today is not an approved Master Gardener program. I live in Hillsborough County. Hillsborough County does have a container gardening program that I have taught, but it doesn't focus on vegetables. And Brittany said that there was an interest in focusing on vegetables. So I told her, well, what I could do is just share my experiences and what works for me, what doesn't work for me. There's no one right way of doing things. When I say I use this product or I do use this variety, there's lots of other options that you'll get into if you actually get into vegetable gardening. It's just there's just so much you can do with it. So the flyer went out that said pretty much what we were going to talk about today. And let me say that as a teacher, I'm okay with you asking questions as it goes along. I feel like if I ask you to wait till the end, you might not remember what the question was. And if it's a question, then it's something that you need to know. So I'm okay with that. And if you have a question, chances are 3 or 4 other people have that same question. So go ahead and ask your questions as they come up. One of the things I learned through my training as a master gardener and a master beekeeper is to keep the information that I put out fact-based. There's a lot of beliefs in gardening and in beekeeping that really are not true. They're believed because people keep repeating it. And if something is repeated over and over and over again, and you hear it, you think, well, it must be true. Sometimes it's not. So I'm going to be careful that I tell you if something is an opinion or if something is not fact-based that's believed. I believe in fact-based information, and actually in these programs where I teach, it's required. They won't let us present information that's not backed up by science. So the first thing we were going to talk about, or I'm going to mention, are the pros and cons of vegetable gardening in containers versus in the ground. One of the main reasons that you might want a vegetable garden in containers is because of the soil we have here in Florida. It's either hard and clay or it's sandy. And with sandy soil, the water just goes right down along with all the nutrients. Our garden soil doesn't have many nutrients like some parts of the country where there's this dark, thick soil. I do know people that very successfully garden in our Florida soil, but what they do is they go through this laborious technique of amending the soil, bringing in compost, animal hay, animal manures, and they work that into the soil. It's backbreaking. It works. So it's not that I'm saying you can't garden in the soil. It does work, or you can use chemicals to take care of that problem. I gravitated to using containers. I started out gardening in my backyard. I had a couple of years of success, and then the nutrients in the soil didn't keep up. The nematodes found where my garden was, and they just destroyed the roots. I didn't have the continuing luck that I had initially, and I didn't understand why. I've been gardening now in my backyard, the same house, for 40 years. But I'm almost exclusively in containers now. About the only thing that I keep in the ground are fruit and some herbs. Everything else is in, all of the vegetables are in containers now, because that's my best success. Our soil is poor. The soil does not hold on to nutrients. It doesn't hold on to water. Another advantage of containers is that you can move them. I'm going to talk in a little bit about how to set up a garden, but access to the sunlight is critical. And if you're in a container, depending on the size of the container, they're movable. You can also choose decorative containers. I was sharing that I'm everything is in my backyard, but I'm moving around now, and I've got some stuff in the side yard. I've got tomatoes in my front yard. So if you want to expose your vegetables to people driving around, you can use decorative containers. And I'm going to talk about containers a bit more in a minute. Container gardening is great for kids. If you get your kid a pot, let's say it's about this big around, and you can put several little vegetables in there and let the child manage it. Teach them how to pull weeds. Teach them how to scout the plants for pests. Teach them how to watch the leaves to see if you're getting some kind of diseases, and let them have their own little garden. That's easier than putting them in a big plot in the ground. Container gardening is easier on your back. It's much easier to stand there and lean like this, pull some weeds, than it is to get down on the ground and then wonder, how am I going to get up? Because gardening can be backbreaking if you have to get down on the ground. It's easier to control weeds in the container garden. Now, weeds will get in your containers because seeds, which are airborne or bird produced, will land inside your containers, but it's so much easier. The soil is loose, you've not walked on it, so it's not compacted. It's easier to pull weeds in a container. Those are all the reasons, and there's probably others that I didn't think about, that you might want to grow in containers. Why would you not want to grow in containers? What are the negatives? Well, one is that they dry out easier, because they're not in the ground. So it's going to require you as the gardener to water them more often. And in some of our heat, if you garden in the summer, and you can garden in the summer here, you may have to water twice a day, depending on how small your container is or how hot it is. But that's one reason why some people may not want to use containers. It does limit the amount of vegetables you can grow, because the spaces in between containers are not on the ground are not growing vegetables. So you will be limited by the size of the container to how much you can grow in a container. If your container is too small or you overpack it, the roots have nowhere to go. Unlike it in the ground, sometimes they can reach out a little bit further. The roots have no way to go, and you might stunt your plants if you're not careful how densely you package it or you plant them. You will be totally responsible for the nutrients in your plants. You're going to have to take care of how you feed your plants. The roots can't reach out looking for nutrients that are already in the ground because you've restricted those roots into the container. So those are the reasons, and there are probably others, why you might not want to use containers. You do have to buy them too, but we're going to talk now, I'm going to mention now about how to choose containers. The numbers and the types of containers that you choose for vegetable gardening, I think there's no limit to where you can go with that. I mostly use earth boxes, but earth boxes can be expensive. I started getting earth boxes probably 30 years ago. One for birthday, one at Christmas, and then I found a commercial farm that had been growing in earth boxes that was discontinuing using the earth boxes, and I was able to buy a bunch of them half price. If you want to go with earth boxes, look online and see if you can find some second-hand ones. I've had my earth boxes, the older ones, at least 30 years, and not a single one of them has broken. They're very, very good quality. Yes, ma'am?
What is an earth box?
Yeah. Okay.
Could we repeat the question so online we don't have to get the microphone? Could we repeat the question?
Her question is, what is an earth box? It's a self-contained growing container. It has a grid inside it. The soil sits on the grid. There's a water reserve underneath it. There's a tube, and the water goes into the tube down into the reserve. When you put your plants, you put your soil in the earth box, and then you put your plants. You also put a strip of fertilizer and cover it with plastic. So you only fertilize once per season. So that's a little bit of a savings, but you do have to deal with the watering. And it protects your plants from, it self-waters all day long as you water it. It self-fertilizes the entire growing season, so it's a little bit of a help with the work. They are a tad pricey. That's why I said go online and see if you can find some second-hand ones. I also realized recently, a couple of years ago, that they're not manufacturing them exactly the same anymore. I went to the Earthbox Center. It's in Ellington, Florida, where they have a big display and they sell the earth boxes and all the accessories. And I realized that the current earth boxes are smaller. So the root capacity is going to be less. The water supply will be a little bit less, and they're thinner. I had purchased some accessories online and they wouldn't fit. What I purchased was a trellising system, and the ones they make now are made to fit the earth boxes that are manufactured now, and they're smaller. So my older, larger boxes, I can't use their current trellising systems. That's when I realized they changed things. I use those because I've got them. You do not have to go that route. It's a little pricey to go that route. I also use half barrels, much cheaper. If you can find some 55-gallon barrels, you cut them in half. You're going to need one. You're going to need to have the lids. Cut them in half, and you've now got 2 barrels of about, 25 gallons of soil. You'll have to drill holes in them, along the bottom, along the side. Drill your holes, and they make a nice container garden because you can put bigger things. In the half barrels I grow 2 tomato plants, or 2 eggplants, or 4 or 5 pepper plants. So the capacity in a half barrel is really good. But you can use those tree pots, the big black ones. They're not as pretty, but they work just fine. I know a number of people that use 5-gallon buckets that they buy from the big box store and plant 1 tomato plant in it. Plant them in a line. Set your trellising system up behind them, because some of the tomatoes get really long and viney, and you need a trellising system. Some of them are more bushy, and you don't. But a 5-gallon bucket can handle the root system of one tomato plant or a couple of pepper plants, and those are not expensive, and they last quite a while. They won't last as many years as an earth box, but they do last pretty well. Plastic pots of any kind you can use. One time I grew tomatoes in a stack of old tires. I don't do that anymore. But, I mean, you can just find all kinds of things that you can put soil in, and you can grow your vegetables in it. Do you have a question?
So yes, for like your tomato plant, what kind of trellis? You're saying you have to have a good trellis system for like your green beans and tomatoes. Are you going to go on that later?
Well, I really wasn't, but her question was about the trellising systems. And it's just like the pots. There's so many things. With tomatoes, you know, they make tomato cages. And you can put the legs of your tomato cages down inside your pots and then grow your tomatoes in the center. If you want, you can put poles in the ground and run some wires or some string. You can buy plastic trellising at the big box stores and just string it between your poles. There's a lot of things that you can do to hold your plants up. Some plants really do require trellising and some don't. I didn't mention the things that I had brought with me, but I'll mention them now. I brought a bunch of seed catalogs so that if you're curious about varieties and how many seeds are out there and you want to grab one of these catalogs, I brought them for you to take. Some of them are this year's and some of them are last year's. If you find something in there and you're really sort of interested in purchasing it, go online and make sure it's still available, especially if it's last year's catalog. The new catalogs start coming out in January. You're going to enjoy looking at some of the varieties. I also brought a whole bunch of old garden magazines. Back when I started gardening, there was no internet. Now I rely on the internet for the answer to everything, but that didn't exist back then. It was information had to come through magazines or through books. And so I got these old magazines and I ran across them recently in the back of a cabinet. I was going to toss them because they are old, but they've got beautiful pictures. They have growing instructions for a lot of different kind of vegetables, and then they have recipes in there for how to use those vegetables in your garden. So if you want any of these, all of them, I would love you to take all of them. Otherwise, I'm going to probably just recycle them. So, a question, yes?
Just in case so I don't forget. Is it true that it's best to order seeds from Europe because they have the non-GMO, or do you recommend that there are good places to buy seeds here?
I don't buy them from Europe. I tend to try to buy heirloom seeds. Heirloom seeds are not GMO. Some of the catalogs are only Southern Exposure, I think. Some of the catalogs only sell heirloom seeds. So if you watch the seed packets, and you can find them at the big box store, and sometimes they'll be labeled heirloom, sometimes they'll be labeled hybrid. Federal law requires that if the seed is a hybrid, it has to be on the package that it's a hybrid. It doesn't have to say heirloom, but if it doesn't say it's a hybrid, then it is going to be an heirloom, and then that won't be a GMO. Now, heirloom and organic are not the same thing. So if that's important to you, if organic is important to you, then watch for that too. If it is organic, it will say it on the package because it costs more. And you'll notice that you'll sometimes get only half the number of seeds if you get organic, or it's a smaller package, or the price will be higher if it's organic. I'm not stuck on organic, but this afternoon I'll be talking a little bit more about organics. I'm not stuck on organics, but to some people that's really important. Yeah. I am stuck on heirlooms because I do seed saving. And if you want to save your seeds, which if you want to save money, saving seeds is a good thing to do, but you don't want to save a seed unless it's an heirloom. The question back here.
What's the difference between the heirloom and the organic?
The definition of an heirloom, and there's not an official definition, but it in general is a seed that's been in production for at least 50 years. An heirloom will produce, if you save a seed from an heirloom fruit, and then you replant it, it will produce a plant and a fruit that's what we call true, T-R-U-E. What that means is it's the same plant and the same fruit from which the seed came. A hybrid is a cross between two different varieties of whatever the vegetable is, tomatoes, cucumbers, whatever. Hybrids are not bad. Absolutely not bad. Hybrids have been developed for centuries. Hybrid is not a GMO. It's where they've crossbred two or more varieties over time to enhance certain characteristics, and some of it's good. Drought tolerance, disease tolerance, earlier fruit set for temperate cold climates. There's reasons why there are hybrids, and it's not a bad thing. But if you want to save seeds, you can grow a hybrid seed, but you're better off to grow an heirloom where you know what you're going to get. I did take some hybrid seeds once and planted them in our community garden, and they were butternut squash. I had room at the community garden, whereas in my backyard, I'm not going to do something like that and take up the land. They looked like watermelons. And people said, "What are you growing?" And I said, "Oh, that's butternut squash." Oh, the looks I got. It was like, But what had happened is that some of the varieties, some of the characteristics of the plants that were used to develop that hybrid came through. We ate them. It was at my church. The priest and I, we took them home and we ate them. They did not taste. They weren't bad. They weren't bad at all. But they didn't taste like a butternut squash. You know, that deep, sweet taste of a butternut. They didn't have that. They tasted. If you'd closed your eyes, you wouldn't know what you were eating. And so, if you're going to go to the trouble of growing something like that, hedge your bets and use the right things. So, and you can find heirloom seeds in the big box stores, but a lot of seed companies are only using heirlooms. Seed Savers Exchange is one of those, and that's one where you can become a member of Seed Savers, and they send you all kinds of information. So I've been a member of Seed Savers for a long time. Baker Creek is another one that has really good heirloom seeds. Yes, ma'am?
So can you say that the organic seeds are the ones that come from like a plant that was grown organically?
Yes, an organic seed. Her question was, how does an organic seed, I guess sort of is produced? It has to come from a plant that was grown organically. And organic, all that means is how the plant was grown. An heirloom can be grown organic. A hybrid can be grown organic. A GMO can't be considered organic because it's already been modified. It's a genetically modified thing. So, but you can grow. It just has to do with how you grow your plant, your soil, your fertilizer, and any pesticides or fungicides if you have to use it. Yeah. Any other questions about seeds? Yes, ma'am?
You're saying you can save the seeds. Do you have to like dry them out before you?
Her question is, how do you prepare your seeds to save? Yes. You need to dry them out. You need to, let's talk about beans, because that's one of the easiest plants to grow. I brought, and hopefully there's one of these for each family. There's not enough one, because I was told that we may have 15 people. I'm so happy that you're here. I brought some seeds for a bean plant called a Rattlesnake snap pole bean. It is an heirloom, and it's one of the best pole beans to grow in Florida. It has a purple and beige pod but it sort of turns green when you cook them. So you're going to go home and you're going to plant these, and they have to be on, you have to trellis them. It's a pole bean. It's going to grow all the way up. When you've eaten the amount you want to eat, or the plant starts looking like it's dying back, leave the pods on the plant and let them dry out till they're completely brown and dry. Pole beans won't shatter. Shattering is when the pod splits open and throws the seeds out. As you're learning how to seed save, you'll learn which plants do that, because you got to get to them faster, because you'll lose your seeds. But the pole beans won't. They'll stay right, the pods will stay right there on the vine. They'll turn brown, 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 dry and crispy, and that's when they're ready to be harvested. You don't have to pull the peas out right away. You can leave them in the pod, sit them someplace out of the rain, out of the sun and the heat, and whenever you're ready, you can harvest them, take them out of the pod, or you can wait until the following season and take them out then. Just store them correctly. Out of the sun, out of the rain, out of the heat. I store seeds in a refrigerator and a freezer because they're too valuable to me. If you do that, your viability lasts many more years than if you don't store them correctly. Also in here, and there's only a few of those because I just found them when I pulled this basket out, is my favorite okra. And these are called Clemson Spineless. I haven't bought okra seeds in 20 years. Every year, and just one of the easiest, one of the very easiest to save. Every year I save a few pods and I have more than enough okra seeds for the following year. But anyway, these are available for those who want them. Put those up there. Any other questions about seeds? Yes, ma'am?
Yes, I've heard that some people vacuum seal their seeds.
You could do. No, vacuum sealing wouldn't hurt it. It's the heat and the humidity. I keep seeds. If you vacuum seal them and they're not completely dry, they can mold. Most of the time, I don't put my seeds in Ziploc bags or any place where there's no air circulation whatsoever. That's why seeds come in paper sleeves, because if there's any moisture left, that they can mold. I put them in paper bags. I use leftover medicine bottles and put them down in those. But you could if you knew for sure that they were completely dry. But I don't think it'll make them viable any longer. Yeah. Yes, ma'am?
Do you rinse the seeds or never rinse?
No, I never rinse the seeds. When you put them back in...
Seeds get pretty gooey and stuff and messy if you leave them.
They're not, okay, she's asking if you rinse them before you store them? No, you don't. If they're gooey, they're not dry. And if you...
Don't rinse them first to let them and then sit them out to dry. You just let
No, I don't rinse them first at all. Now, we're getting into more things that I don't mind talking about this. There are certain seeds that benefit from fermentation. And in that, you put them in water. Tomato seeds are a good example. You put your tomato seeds in water, leave them for several days. All the stuff that you don't want, the goo, the non-viable seeds will float to the top. The viable seeds will sink to the bottom. You pour off the top, and then you lay your seeds out to dry. You can put them on like a paper towel and make your own seed mats. Or you can put them on a piece of wax paper where they won't stick, and then after they're completely dry, then you can use them or store them. But most seeds, like for beans, they dry right there on the plant. There's the kind of seeds that are like beans and peas that are exposed and can dry, and okra, and then those that are inside a plant, like cucumbers, tomatoes, and those are going to be they're going to be wet, and it's really important that you dry them out before you store them, or else they will mold. But you can wash like squash. if you, a butternut squash, I'll talk about my butternut squash. You probably will want to get all that goo off of them, but it's important then that you dry them out before you store them so they don't mold. Pardon? No, it doesn't hurt to. You just don't have to. If it's a dry seed, you don't have to do that. If it's a wet seed, that's up to you. Yes, ma'am.
I love this idea of not having to bend down to weed. I'm trying to picture in my mind what a raised garden container bed looks like.
There's different kinds. You had something you wanted to say?
I was just gonna say, you can get them at Walmart. They're raised bed, yeah. They're real cheap.
Some of them are just a board that it's a rectangle, so that's only like about that much further higher than the ground. Some of them you can, now these are pricey, what I'm talking about, are a grow box that's on legs. Those are much more pricey, but the garden catalogs sell them all the time. You can go online and find directions to make your own. It would be a lot cheaper to do that. And so the height you make them is up to you. I've got one in my backyard that's cinder blocks. And it's been there for years, and I've been growing in the cinder blocks. That's where I've moved my pineapple patch. But it's easier to weed it.
Do you have anything at the bottom? If you have the center blocks that you created, do you have?
If you're going to build, she's wanting to know the bottom of the container, not the container. Containers have a bottom of the raised bed. It's better if you put something down there to kill any weeds. I use cardboard, thick layers of newspaper. You can use landscape fabric, that black stuff. All of that lets water go through it. I've quit using landscape fabric because over time it breaks down. And then it starts, but it doesn't decompose. And then it starts working its way up and it's ugly. So I like to use cardboard or thick newspapers. Over the course of the first season, it's going to decompose. It's going to be gone. And you're not going to be able to go back in and replace it, but you've already killed anything that's been buried under it for that growing season, and the weeds are not going to come up from the bottom. That doesn't mean you're not going to have weeds, because weeds are often the seeds are airborne, or the birds bring them in, or they grow up under the side of your raised bed. But yeah, I would put something underneath it first, just to kill the weeds. Your question?
Does that stop nematodes from coming?
It will not. No. The cardboard and the newspaper will not. One of the things that will help you, and I'm going to talk about it, the soil that you use. Nematodes like our lousy soil. So when you're filling, I don't want to get ahead of myself. You're going to need to have better soil in your containers than what you're walking on in your backyard. And if you put the better soil in your raised beds, that helps deter the nematodes, but you'll have to continue to amend it, because over time the nutrients will degrade. So let's talk about how you're going to set up your garden. The first thing that's really important is that you locate where the sun is. Most vegetable plants need about 6 hours of sunlight a day, direct sunlight. You can get by with a little less if it's a plant that you're just growing to harvest the leaves, like lettuce and spinach and collards and kale. But if it's growing a fruit, a cucumber, a tomato, an eggplant, it's going to need 6 hours at least, and it actually probably will do better with more than 6 hours. Because the earth moves and the sun is in different locations, watch where your sunlight is before you decide where you're going to set up your garden, because that's one of the most important things, is that you have sunlight. And remember, if you've got containers and they're not too big, as the seasons change, you can move those containers. So like I especially like to move the pots that have herbs in it, because when we get really, really hot, the herbs don't like a lot of sun. And if they're in a small enough pot, and herbs, you can grow them in the smaller pots. You just move your pots. Now, they have to be watered more often, but you can just take those smaller pots and move them. When I talk about setting up your garden, I'm assuming it's going to be a garden at a residential home, that nobody's thinking, oh, this is information for commercial gardening or commercial farming. It's at your home. So you need to get out there and start scouting where the sunlight falls in your yard. Think about where your water source is, and make sure you're going to have a water source. If you've got a lot of property, you've got 10 acres, you don't want to put your garden so far away that, even though that may be where the sunlight is the best, that you can't get a water hose out there. Hauling water in buckets is time consuming and it's heavy. So you're going to want to have your garden someplace where you can get water to it. It's better. Yes, ma'am.
We have a screen, many of us have screened in pool areas. We grew tomatoes in there one year and papaya in a large container. Papayas are fabulous, and the seed we grew is amazing. But I'm wondering if putting them in a screened area is a big problem. I know pollination is probably a problem with that.
In a screened area, if your plants need pollinators, you're eliminating that. Tomatoes pretty much self-pollinate, but everything doesn't papayas don't self-pollinate, I don't think. Maybe they do. I'm not sure about that. I don't think so, because there's male and female trees in papayas, and you have to have your flowers have to have access to a male tree. It doesn't mean it has to be in your yard. But I don't know I don't know about the...
I don't know how it happened, it was amazing. It only lasted 1 year, but it was
Yeah.
fabulous. But, so the screening itself, does that take out too much of the sunlight?
It does take out a lot of the sunlight, but and I've never tried growing inside a screened room. I mean, regular plants like ornamentals I have, but vegetables, I don't know how well, I don't know how well they would. I think you ought to experiment and let Brittany know. And
Tomatoes didn't do as well as we hoped, so maybe we just need to get them outside.
yeah, your question.
Yeah, my question is about the soil in the pots.
Okay, I'm going to get to that. She's questioning what kind of soil to use in the pots, and that is one of the things I'm going to talk about.
Yeah, and the next question is, I didn't realize that the lizards bite on the papaya flowers. The little lizards, they come here and they bite on
The lizards are eating the papaya blossoms? I've never heard of that. Oh, wow.
watch them, they eat on my papaya.
There is a papaya bug that will attack your papayas, and what I tell people to do is put a net bag around the papaya to keep that bug from being able to get in there. It's got one of those piercing mouths, and when it pierces the papaya, then the papaya starts rotting. So I tell people to you can buy those net bags in the paint department at Lowe's. They're not expensive. To put one of those bags around the papayas, it could be, if you knew it was pollinated, you could put the bag on it. But if it's not pollinated, you're gonna keep it from being able to be pollinated. Your question?
Yes, I was wondering, you mentioned before that the container is a great idea for kids. What would be a first-time plant for some of our children or grandchildren that could grow? And what size? Like you said, 5 gallons for one tomato plant.
If you're going to set up a child's garden in a big pot, you just choose something that has real quick germination, so that there's that wonderful feeling right away. A lot of gardening programs recommend radishes. How many kids like to eat radishes? I never had a kid that liked to eat radishes. They do germinate fast. And they grow fast, and they're probably one of the earliest things you can harvest in a garden. But I don't know if that's best for kids. Pick something that does germinate really fast. You could do beans, but beans take a few weeks to reach the point of harvest. You could do some herbs. Just pick something that's going to have quick results, and let them have their own little garden. Maybe let them know. Maybe let them ask them, what do you want to grow? What do you want to grow that you can eat and we can all eat? Yeah. It's better if you locate your garden close to your home. Close to your home. If you want to run out at the last minute and you're cooking and pick some basil or pick some chives and it's far away, guess what you're going to do? You're going to say, forget it, I'll do it next time. The closer you can get it to your home, the more likely you are to go out there and harvest your vegetables and use it. It's good if you can get it close to your tool shed also, or wherever you're storing your tools. I'm just thinking about convenience, so that when you need to go out and do something, there it is, right ready for you to go. When you put your planters out, leave a little bit of room between them. You need air circulation. That's one of the best ways to deter diseases in your plants. If they're all crowded together and the air doesn't circulate, the diseases are going to be much more prevalent. Also, pollinators won't find them if it's too thick. Pollinators will depend on the site. They smell good. The pollinators can smell, but they're going to depend on being able to see that blossom, and they're not going to try to penetrate a deep area where the plants are too close together. So give everything some circulation. Okay. So do you want to use seeds or do you want to buy seedlings? That's the next thing we're going to talk about.
I have a problem with white flies.
Boy, I do too. She's talking about white flies. Oh, they went crazy in my peas last season. And part of that was my fault. I saw them, but they weren't too many. And I thought, oh, it's not bad. That changed almost overnight. I'm going to talk about pests and diseases, and that's the last thing I'm going to talk about. I'm going to try to remember to talk about white flies. If I don't, will you remind me? Okay. Yeah, they were bad last year, and I'm not the only one that's noticing that. Yeah. So do you want to plant with seeds, or do you want to go buy your seedlings? There's reasons to do either one. Either one. If you plant with seeds, it's going to take longer because the seed has to go through the germination process and then grow. But seeds are cheaper. A sleeve of seeds, even if it's only got 15 or 20 seeds in it, is probably the same price as a seedling. So you potentially have 10 or 15 or 20 plants as opposed to one. So it is cheaper to use seeds. You can plant your seeds earlier so that you have seedlings the right size when it's time to get them in the garden. It will require a little bit more planning. You're going to have to look at your calendar and figure out when you want to put your garden in, and then the things that you grow as a seedling, start them earlier. The biggest reason to use seeds is what I was mentioning before in these seed catalogs. There are hundreds and hundreds of varieties of seeds that you never see in the supermarket as something you can buy. My favorite radish is called a watermelon radish. I have never seen it in a supermarket. Now, somewhere there could be supermarkets that sell it. I've never seen a watermelon radish. It's a wonderful radish. It's an heirloom. And if you can get some seeds, it's a big radish, and it's called watermelon because the interior is red and the outside is green, and it's very, very mild. It doesn't have that sharp bite that the little red radishes that we buy in the supermarket has. It's cool to use, to put cheese on and put on an hors d'oeuvre tray. And that's just one variety that I'm talking about. When you start looking in these seed catalogs, there are hundreds of varieties of just tomatoes. And every catalog doesn't carry every variety, so it's worthwhile getting catalogs from a lot of companies. You can go online and request them. They don't charge for their catalogs. Once you start getting them, either there's companies that publish a lot of the different catalogs, or they share their mailing list. You'll start getting catalogs. Some of the catalogs I brought, I have never bought, but yet every year I get their catalogs. When they start coming in, it's like Christmas. And Christmas is already past. Seedlings will cost you more, but as I said, they're already germinated, they've already grown. You don't have to worry about, are my plants going to germinate, because you've got that seedling. So there are advantages. Maybe you waited too late and you realize, it's going to get too hot. I don't have time to plant tomato plants. I've done that. And then I've gone to a nursery and bought them. It's just, there's a convenience, but it costs more and you're limited in your varieties. You'll find as you start using seeds that it's exciting. It's fun to watch that seed burst up through the soil. It's like new life coming up. And you're going to probably, my prediction, gravitate to the seeds. Just because. So when you set up your garden, you decide now where you're going to put it, because you've scouted your yard and you know where the sun is. You're going to have chosen what type of containers you want to start with. Now, the question is, what do you put in it? I use a product called Jungle Growth, and I buy it from Lowe's. It's organic. It's got a little bit of fertilizer in it. So immediately I don't have to fertilize right away, but eventually I do. Miracle Grow makes a good container gardening material. You might find others depending on what nurseries you have available to you. I use soil from a bag. It is a little pricey the first year you set it up, but you don't have to dump it out and start all over. You will need to amend it. One of the things is it compacts a little bit, and then when you pull the old plants out, you're going to need to put more soil in, and you use fresh soil when you put it in. The first year it's going to be a little pricey getting all that soil, but do it in stages, do it gradually, and get your soil going, and just buy something in just don't dig the soil out of your ground, because if you do that, then you're just transferring those nematodes right into in containers, and there's other things in the soil. There's all kinds of problems with our soil, and the more you grow a garden in the ground in an area, the more you attract the pests and diseases.
Is there a better soil you would recommend over others?
For what?
For the potted plant. Are there higher bred, different quality?
I use Jungle Growth.
So
That's the name of it.
soil?
It's the name of the soil, Jungle Growth, and I buy it at Lowe's. It's in big bags and it's really heavy. So that's what I've been using for years. Like I said, Miracle Grow also has something that's comparable. And I don't know that one is more expensive than the other. They don't come in the same size bags. So I don't know whether I'm paying more or if I switch to a different one, it would be cheaper. I just know I have good luck with it, and so that's what I stick with. It's just what I do. Pests and diseases. That is a topic that could take the rest of the evening. What I decided to do is show you some of the most common things, and I went out and I scouted my garden and I brought some of them with me. So it's going to take a little while for this stuff to work its way around. This one is labeled aphids. When you get the baggie that says aphids, look at the tips of the plant. Those are lima beans. It looks like dirt is on the plant, but that's not dirt. Each little black speck is a little critter. Very, very tiny. You can't make out the parts of that bug with the naked eye. You can under a microscope. That little critter has a piercing, sucking mouth, and that's what it does. It gets on the stems. It particularly likes the tips, the tender, young, new parts of the plant. But you'll see it all up and down the vines as the population grows. They can get all over the plant. They use that mouth to feed, and it damages the plant. It's one of the very first pests I always see each growing season, and I watch for it because it's much easier to control if you jump on it right away. One of the things you can do is take a water hose and put a little bit of pressure, that thing you do with your thumb, and just blow it off the plant. They can't come back, but you won't get them all. So they will continue to come back, and you'll have to continue to deal with it. You'll notice with aphids is that there's also ants up and down the plant. There's a relationship between the aphids and the ants. The ants are protecting the aphids, and the ants are eating the aphid excrement. Excrement? That's what the ants are feeding on. It's called honeydew. You may, if you're lucky, see honeybees also foraging, because honeybees will take honeydew and put it in their honey because it's all sugary and sweet. But you'll see ants especially. So it's easy to recognize aphids, and it's easy to take care of it. If you don't do it right away, the population is going to explode. Aphids have live births. They don't lay eggs. And the population just goes crazy if you don't deal with it right away. You can use a product if the water thing doesn't work long enough. And if you get a lot of big vines, I especially have problems on beans. And that's what this is, lima beans. I especially have problems with those. If the vines get really big and you have a lot of them, the water hose thing can take a lot of time. You can use insecticidal soap. That's an organic way of controlling aphids. But you have to get the soap, the liquid, directly on the aphids for it to kill it. So it's still a little bit of time consuming. Some people make their own insecticidal soap. The University of Florida doesn't recommend it because dish soap is not made to go on plants, but people have been doing it for years. I've done it in the past, but it's not recommended by the university. If you want to make your own, go online and find the formula. You'll put a little bit of oil in it, which makes it stick, and there's a couple of other things you put in it, and then the insecticidal soap will kill the aphids. If you have to go beyond that and the soap doesn't seem to be working, although it should, there are organic pesticides that are not very toxic that you could use. I brought a couple. I'm going to keep them in this bag because I don't want anybody getting anything on their hands. One of them, this is one of my favorite companies. It says contains spinosad. Spinosad is a chemical that's been approved for use on organic vegetables, but it is a chemical. It will kill aphids, it'll kill the caterpillars, but it is a chemical. You can use it on organics, but you don't want to get it on your skin or on you. This is Southern Ag, and I buy it at a nursery in Plant City, and I use spinosad for aphids, for caterpillars, for some beetles. If you end up having to go with a commercial product, read the label. Read the label carefully. Just because a little bit works, a bunch more does not work better. Follow the label because you don't want to hurt your plant. So follow the labels. There's also a fungicide that I use on my tomatoes to try to prevent early and late blight. That's a problem we have here because of our humidity. And you'll know your tomatoes have blight because the bottom leaves start turning yellow, and then they get this sclerotic look where they've got these spots, rotting spots on them. If you've got the time, and I do this every week, I go through my tomato plants and I remove any branches or leaves that have that, and I throw it I get rid of that. Do not throw that in your compost pile if you compost. You don't want to introduce that to your compost. I remove those every week, and I spray a fungicide which won't cure it, but will help prevent it. And since I started doing that regimen, I'm getting way more tomatoes than I used to get. Another thing that I have a problem with is caterpillars. Yes, ma'am. Ag, AG, Southern Ag, AG. When you start seeing leaves that look like this, you need to start looking closer, because these leaves, you can see the edges of these leaves. Something's chewing on these leaves. When I go out and I look at the vine, I can't find any bugs or insects on the vine, but something's eating that leaf. I know that there's a problem. So then I start looking closer. This is from the same plant. I don't know if you're going to want to do this, but if you want to open it up, there's on the side of the leaf is a little curl. And underneath that little curl is a caterpillar. The moth lays her eggs during the night, usually on the underside of the leaf. When they hatch, they're larvae, caterpillars, and they start feeding on the leaves. To protect themselves, they get on the edge of the leaf, they make these little slits, and they roll up. So when I spray insecticidal soap, it doesn't touch that caterpillar, and it has to touch the caterpillar to kill it. I take the time every morning, I'm retired. I take the time every morning to look around on the vines and just hand pick those things off. That's one of the best ways to control it, but you're never going to get all of them. And if it gets out of hand, you're going to need a product like spinosad, if it gets out of hand. The same with the hornworms on your tomatoes. They're very good at, I don't have one of those. They're very good at camouflage. I hand pick them, just flick them on the ground and step on them. This is an example of leaf miners. Leaf miners, other than in citrus, is usually not something that's going to cause a big problem, because your annual vegetable plants will outgrow it. But if they get out of hand, they can be a problem. It's fairly common. I only brought that because I had it in my yard. It's not something that chances are in your vegetable garden you're going to have a big problem with. The white flies. Yes, ma'am.
What are the white little bugs that get on the sago plants? They're white, and all of a sudden, boom, they'll be all over.
Sagos. I'm not sure now. It's probably white flies. With white flies, last year like I said, I waited too long to deal with it, and it got out of hand. You know you have white flies when you go up to your box or your container and you disturb the leaves, and there's this cloud of little white flies. If you carefully stand there and turn the leaves over, you'll see the little nits on the underside, little things crawling around. You've got to do something, because it'll destroy that plant. I fought them all year, and I didn't do it early enough, and they ended my pea crop early. I did get some harvest, but I know now that the minute I see it, I'm gonna mix up some insecticidal soap and start working on it. And you can use insecticidal soap, but you have to get underneath the leaves, and that's the hard part. When you spray, you've got to get that sprayer wand underneath the plant, because that's where the nits are. And if you don't get the soap on them, it won't kill them. You had another question?
So it's the soap water helps.
It helps with white flies. Or if that doesn't work, I go with the spinosad. Yeah, the spinosad. And that's usually as far as I ever have to go. And I don't usually have to go any further with pest control. Yes, ma'am? She asked if there's a particular type of dish soap. Most of the recipes recommend Dawn, but it's important to not use a dish soap that has a degreaser. that will damage your plants. Yeah.
I have a question. So, from your experience, have you noticed that the container pests are less than a regular ground garden?
No, that's one thing with the containers. With the containers, you've dealt with what's underneath the soil, but you're still going to have the same problems with pests and diseases above. Where I've found that there's more or less problems is in the time of the year. I had one of my best gardens all through the winter last year. I grew tomatoes all winter long, but I didn't have a frost all winter long. I haven't had a freeze at my house, and I'm in Hillsborough County. I haven't had a freeze in my house in 3 years. Yeah, so I grew them all winter long, and it was the best garden, but I didn't have very many pests at all. Come springtime, that changed. That's when I had the white flies. Your question?
Oh, I'm sorry. For the aphids, back to the aphids, is it okay? Some people buy ladybugs online and they just put them on the plants. Is that okay? Aphids
Oh, it's certainly okay. It's certainly okay. She's asking about buying ladybugs online for aphids. Just be aware that they're not going to hang around. They're going to fly off. They may eat your current aphid population, but then they're going to leave. So unless you have a lot of plants and enough food, meaning aphids, to keep them there, they're going to leave. The problem with ladybugs, now I've never bought them, is that they don't show up in enough quantity to deal with the aphids. I'll see them, and I know that they're there to eat the aphids, and so are lacebugs, but there's not enough of them. There's way more aphids, and they grow much faster than the ladybug population does. But yes, it's definitely, if you've got enough food in that garden to keep them there, that's a very non-chemical way of dealing with pests. Your question? Yes.
Have you experienced with diatomaceous earth
For slugs?
or any kind of insects?
I mostly am aware of using that to keep slugs away from your plants. You won't have as big a problem in containers. But, I'm sorry. Diatomaceous earth, which is I'm totally drawing a blank of what it's made out of. Shells, yes, shells. And they grind it up, but it has real sharp, you don't notice it, but it's got really sharp edges, and when slugs crawl across it, it rips their body. Another way, if you get slugs in your containers, is to put a strip of copper. And you can buy copper that's in strips, and it's got an adhesive on the back of it. Put a strip of copper all the way around the container, and the slugs won't go across it. Or you can put beer in a container in the ground, and slugs like to drink. And they'll go in the container and they'll drown.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
I hear a lot of talk about BT, but I've never used it because I feel like it's a strong chemical.
It's approved. She's asking about BT. BT stands for Bacillus thuringiensis, and it's a organic approved. I think it's a bacteria. It's a bacteria. In fact, this fungicide is a form of Bacillus. It's not Bacillus thuringiensis. I can't pronounce that second word. It's that long. And what it does is it's like a bacteria that when the insects ingest it, it messes up their insides and they can't eat anymore and they will die.
So it is organic.
Yes. Oh, it's approved for organic use. Yes, it's organic. It's a bacteria.
And so the diatomaceous earth, there's the food grade, which is for gardening, and then there's the other one, which is not for gardening. And I just want to clarify that you cannot breed that in because it can cause severe lung issues
Okay.
too. And so you have to wear a mask when you put it in the garden or whatever. And it'll only last until the next rain.
This is true. This is true. Some people use like cayenne pepper for pests, but then as soon as you have a rain, you've got to, or tobacco juice. As soon as you have a rain, it's gone.
Very last question.
She said it's her very last question.
How do you eliminate those locusts? There are buzzards in them.
The what? I've never dealt with locusts. Now, grasshoppers, the lubber grasshoppers, the lubbers,
Very colorful.
you got pesticides. There is a product called NOLA that will kill the babies if you put it out when you first notice that there's tiny babies. But once that lubber gets that heavy shell, you've got to manually pick them. I don't touch them. I don't. I was being funny. You can take a brick and squish them. You can knock them on the ground, but they're fast. I cut them in half with my clippers. Sometimes they don't die forever, even though you've cut them in half. We had a really bad problem with those in the community garden that I'm a member of in Plant City, and we started using NOLA at the very first sign of them, and we've really gotten a control of it. But if you get a bad infestation of those lubber grasshoppers, they can destroy your yard. I'll tell you something funny we did. We had a festival and we had a contest for the kids, and we gave them cups of soapy water, and whoever brought the most dead grasshoppers in won the prize. They loved it. They're not afraid of picking them up. They loved it.
What was the name of the stuff that kills the babies?
I think it's called NOLA.
Oh, I was just going to say, I know some of you have to go because we said 2 to 3, but how many of you would like to stay? And okay, and let me ask you again: was this information helpful for those of you who have to go? And could we ask Miss Nancy to come back because she has somebody here that would really bring her back, and that's this little sunshine right here. Her name is. Tell her your name. This is Sydney, and this is her grandma, and this is Brittany, her mom. And so we're so grateful that Miss
Thank you.
Nancy has come, and this is Sydney. So, Miss Nancy, would you be willing to come back?
Sure. And I'm willing to stay and answer questions. If you do have to leave, check out the magazines. I sure don't want to take those home.
So maybe we can take like a 3-4 minute break. Okay. I guess I'm being
Told. Okay. This is, what's your name?
Sydney.
This is Sydney, and Miss Nancy's your grandma, right?
Right.
Right. Okay. So we're going to take a 3-minute break. For those of you who have to go but get a chance to get some of your seeds, you may. And then we'll just restart our second session and, talk more. Because this is so much to talk about in 1 hour. So.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Okay. So 3-minute break.